From Geppetto Studios in New Freedom, Pennsylvania, welcome to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, your home for inclusive, positive geek culture, where we talk about movies, comics, music, books, and whatever else we feel like. Please welcome your host.
I mean, you can't get much more arrogant than that, calling yourself the Conqueror.
This just consummate, deceptive, complex individual.
The other me's are much worse.
Brad Mendenhall.
Hey kids, it is episode 241 of the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, and it is a good one. From the excellent Escape from New York Minute podcast, Eric and Molly join me to talk about Disney Plus's recent Marvel series, Loki. I miss talking with these two every week, and it was a joy having them back. Anywho, we need to talk. The goal of the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast has always been to come out with episodes weekly, and that hasn't been happening, and it's my fault. Behind the scenes, things have been crazy for me. I was laid off from my day job. I got a new job, which got bought out by a third job. As you can imagine, this has been a challenge, and it's taken a lot of time. I'm hoping things will soon return to normal, and the conversations I have backlogged will make their way to you. I promise they are worth it. This is exciting. For a long time, I would talk every week with our guests during the much beloved Escape from New York Minute. We have Molly and Eric together again. Guys, how you doing?
Woo!
Wait, what? Huh? Wait a minute. I didn't know you guys were both on this call.
We're back on the call, and I'm allowed to talk this time. God, we recorded for a year, didn't we? Or over a year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not too long ago, KJ Valencic, music contributor, he was a guest on the show. He was over at the house not that long ago. He's like, yeah, it was a good show. It's great having you guys together to talk about the Disney Plus streaming service original production of Loki. We have our episodes to review these streaming shows, these Marvel Disney Plus shows. And I was like, I wonder who I'm going to have. And then, Eric, the last episode happened. I was like, well, I know who I'm going to have this time. Because you love yourself some Kang the Conqueror.
Well, if you set me up that way, Brad, this whole episode is going to be just about the last episode, and we're never even going to discuss the first 5.
We got to start at the end. Because, and this doesn't happen to me too often, I got tricked by a fan-made trailer. Because after each episode, they were doing a lot of trailers for the next episode, and there was a fan-made trailer with Kang. I was like, this is awesome, and I shared it, and then I realized, like, oh, crap, that wasn't real. It's like, Eric's going to kill me if Kang's not in that episode.
Kang is my second favorite comic book villain, second only to the immortal Doctor Doom. I have been years wanting Kang badly in the MCU, and honestly, after all the time travel stuff of Avengers Endgame, I thought MCU would make the business decision to never use Kang because they figured we had this huge time travel movie. We've done time travel. We're not going to bring in a guy whose whole thing is time travel. It'll be too much with time travel. And I kind of gave up. And then they announced, of course, that he was going to be the villain in Ant-Man and the Wasp 3, which, well, on the one hand, I was happy I was going to get Kang. On the other hand, I was kind of bummed because it's like he's a major Avengers villain. He's been around since one of the beginning issues. He's one of the top villains over the years. And I was like, he's going to be relegated to just an Ant-Man and Wasp villain in one movie. I was like, okay. I'm going to get annoyed.
You sort of wondered as if, like, Kang is going to be some street-level villain with...
Yeah.
Heck, the real bad guy in the second movie was, like, Walton Goggins, who was, like, a dirty restaurateur.
Yes, exactly. The comic book villain was Ghost, and was not what Ghost really is in the comics, and wasn't really that interesting of a villain, so I was not particularly excited. Then, in episode 2 of Loki, they name the character who was sort of in charge of the TVA, and specifically she's called Ravonna. And now, as someone well-versed in Kang lore, I know that Ravonna in the comic books is Kang's sometime love interest. So as soon as I heard that name in episode 2, I said, this show is all about the Time Variance Authority, and the character who is very connected to Kang just got introduced in the second episode. I wonder if Kang's going to be set up here, maybe I'll get a little bonus. And so I started kind of mentally counting down from that episode. I wonder if we're going to get him. And I didn't want to get too excited. You don't know if they're going to go there. You don't know if they're saving him for the movie. You don't know what's going to happen. The character appears there in the 6th episode, and as soon as he opens the door, he's clearly got clothes that are purple and green, which are the colors of Kang's costume in the comics. And so as soon as that character appeared on screen, I was said, yes!
It was so dicey because everyone convinced themselves that Mephisto was going to be in WandaVision.
Oh, yeah, right.
We all look for those things. Some of it's got to be intentional where Disney's like, we're going to screw with people and we're going to make them think it's left when it goes right. But, there was Kang. So, Molly, are you as in love with Kang, the character, as Eric has been?
I never read any of the comics, so a lot of my questions about Loki, I look at Loki in context of a real significant writing challenge. So I look at it more of just the merits of the story in the greater film MCU, and then how they accomplished basically ripping up the rug for 5 movies and trying to retool this character arc for him in a really short amount of time. So my question, going back to Eric, is knowing the stories of the TVA from the comic perspective, I'm kind of curious about how you're seeing their adaptation as a TV show, how that relates to the comics, and were you satisfied by their take on it?
Yeah, the agents in the comic books, at least when I read them, I haven't read comics regularly for about 20 years, so I'm basing this on 80s and 90s Marvel. I know that they've done a lot of retconning and rebooting and stuff, so if what I'm saying is out of date, I apologize any current comic readers, but based on when I read the comics, the TVA agents all had no faces. They all wore the same suit, so they were basically exactly the same. And it was that bureaucracy, though. They all sat at desks with computers and were like, timeline 70.75 has something weird. Agent XRQ, go out there and take care of it. And so the show really did lean into the whole just red tape, bureaucratic insanity of it all. So, I was pleased with that.
And something I always find interesting when you have really well-known properties like Harry Potter or Marvel or DC, I'm always curious, people who aren't real familiar with it, because it's got to change the way that you view it and the way you enjoy it. Because for Eric and I, it's like, okay, I've read a bunch of stories with Kang, I've read a bunch of stories with Loki, and it's so interesting. For me, it's interesting to see, okay, how are they going to make this work? How are they going to tweak it? How will it be the same? How will it be different? And also just the, oh gosh, there's Kid Loki and there's Frog Thor and all that stuff. And I read the Frog Thor comics.
Me too.
Walt Simonson, the writer and / artist on Thor during that run, who created Frog Thor, has been on this show. Who's the nicest guy. So it was like, it's so great to see those little things. But without the wasted teens and 20s that we had, does it still, how well does it still hold together for you, Molly? I'm sure there's a thing where you're looking at stuff as like, okay, I know that's a joke. I know right now Brad and Eric and a bunch of the dorks that I associate with are all laughing their ass off. How does it still hold together for you?
I think the short answer is yes. I think it still does. Obviously, I'm missing out on Easter eggs because there's references that you guys are going to get in a deeper manner, and the writers are speaking to you as somebody who's been a longtime fan of the narrative and of the characters. And so I think for me, from a technical perspective, for one, I love Loki. I've always thought Loki was one of my favorite characters. Again, even not having the context that you guys have in terms of the property they've developed, he's always been one of my favorites. So I was really anticipating this particular change of story. And I knew just from setup, I think is it Endgame or Infinity? No, it must be Endgame when he snags the Tesseract and disappears. So I knew they were setting him up for something. They were going to bring him back. There's just no way they're just going to kill him and he's gone. So I was very excited to see this kind of Brazil-esque sort of take. I feel like they have enough in there for me as somebody who's followed all the movies and now seen all the TV shows. From a writing perspective, I have a lot of respect because they're working in things that you guys are being spoken to, and they're working things in for me as somebody who's followed the whole media property. And they're also trying to take some new kind of creative liberties with it while still being coherent with a whole lot of hands in the kitchen of different directors, different writers, and trying to make it cohesive across the board and please a lot of people, I think is a really tall order. And so I think this also was a real big challenge, now that I'm on my high horse, a real challenge to try and change this man's arc in 6 episodes, which is even, I would say, half the time of even like kind of a standard specialized Netflix, kind of comic-based show. Normally you get like 12 or 13 episodes. They had to do in half time. So I think they had a real hell of not a problem, but a real challenge in writing of like, how do you get Loki, this just consummate, deceptive, complex individual, to have this kind of awakening that it took 5 movies to do over.
Yeah, I feel like if I had one criticism of the show, it's that the Loki of the show was a bit too much like the redeemed Loki of the later movies, as opposed to the fact that this is the Loki that literally just ended the movie Avengers, where he's just tried to take over the entire planet and stabbed Thor with a knife during the battle and didn't care about the slaughter of innocent civilians. And I know they had that scene where he watches his life play out on the screen. This version of Loki sees what happens to the mainstream version of himself, and obviously that could affect him. But it was maybe a little too abrupt for me, that they were leaning a bit on the audience's love of Loki as he is now, to hand wave a little bit of the way that Loki would have been after where his character stood at the end of the original Avengers movie.
The Loki that we're seeing in this show is probably 2-3 days removed from the guy who got an innocent guy and shoved some sort of weird machine thing into his eyeball.
Right. And brainwashed people to build that machine. Yeah.
And there was a lot of innocent people killed during the attack on New York. It says a lot for both Tom Hiddleston, who's a really charming, likable actor, and also for the writers, and not even just specifically the show, just the arc of that character where he wasn't an anti-hero. He wasn't misunderstood. He wasn't a redeemed guy. He was the villain in Thor.
Yep.
And he was even more the villain in Avengers. They actually sort of made it work, and they've had some awareness because, yeah, in that scene they did it. At least they did show, it was like, yeah, he did those things. He wasn't brainwashed. He wasn't tricked. No, he did these bad things, and we're going to try to redeem him. It's not like Jason Statham in the Fast and Furious movies, where in the 7th movie, he was a bad guy who killed innocent people and blew people up and was trying to murder the cast, the characters in that show. I mean, in that movie series. And then in the next movie, he like punches Rock a little and they growl at each other and then they're friends. It was so weird. And it really is just a thing that they realized Jason Statham sort of connected with the audience. And apparently people like working with Jason Statham, and they're just going to make it work off, even though it makes no damn sense. At least the line in this, even though you're right, there's some hand waving and it's a little, okay, that's happening a little too easy. But at least the arc works because the writing's good enough and Tom Hiddleston is like, he sells it enough. It's like, okay, I'll go along with this. Because I hate that stuff. I don't like redeemed bad guys where it doesn't track. Go to Avengers Age of Ultron, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, that was a really sudden change of heart. It's like, I'm pretty sure they were killing people, right? Credit given that they made this work as well as they did. Eric, overall, aside from just a really big finish at the end, how did you enjoy the show from start to finish?
Oh, it was good. I enjoyed it. I've enjoyed all three of them so far that we've had so far. I mean, I don't think that none of them are the greatest television I've ever seen, but they're all very solidly moving the MCU story along. They're all well made. They're all been very enjoyable. I've watched every episode with both of my kids. They like the shows. Very pleased with how MCU is doing on Disney Plus, and I think that all the other shows that are going to be coming up are going to be good too. Yeah, as a whole, very pleased with the show.
This has been my criticism of the MCU, and I don't know if it's a criticism, it's just more of an observation. Marvel has been very good at, to use baseball terminology, and I've said this before, Marvel's been really good at hitting doubles. They don't take big swings necessarily because it's hard to take big swings when you're part of a grander scheme. So haven't always been the most daring. When you're doing that, when you're playing it a little bit safe, you're not going to end up with a Dark Knight, but you're also not going to end up with a Batman v Superman. You give up a little something, but you gain something where there's a consistency. And I think that's been the case with the shows as well, where there has been some daring stuff, usually in early episodes. Like the first 4 or 5 episodes of WandaVision, I thought were really cool and really inventive. But then when you got to the last episode, okay, now we got to sort of tie it together and have the big fight. And also, where does this lead for the next Marvel movie? And it's sort of the same thing here, where I really liked the early episodes, where it's like, okay, this is really some interesting, daring stuff. And I didn't see that going. Wow, that's a lot of Lokis. There's an alligator.
Stole the show.
The alligator was great. And then in the last episode, it's like, okay, this is cool and it's great to see Kang. However, it is a lot of setup to, well, where is this going to go next? Setting up the next season and also setting up future movies, because Eric, you explain it best, because you've been waiting for this your whole life to explain how Kang could tie into the rest of this Phase 4 of Marvel.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like he is being set up as, to use a phrase that I actually hate, but is the big phrase in the vernacular these days, the big bad of at least the next few segment of movies, because he's clearly going to be in the second season of Loki. I mean, that last scene showing his statue, which is comic accurate, by the way, that costume, clearly means he's going to be in season 2. We already know he's confirmed for Ant-Man and the Wasp. But Doctor Strange 2 is being called Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, I think, if I'm getting it right.
Yeah.
We've now been introduced to the multiverse. We've been introduced to Kang as a big part of that multiverse. So I think it's a fairly good bet. He's going to have some kind of role there. And then, of course, all these rumors about the next Spider-Man movie, about who might be in the next Spider-Man movie from previous iterations of Spider-Man, well, that screams multiverse as well. So he could have a role in the next Spider-Man movie as well. Clearly, he's not going to be just in Ant-Man 3 like I was afraid of.
What do you like about Kang? There have been Kang stories that I have enjoyed, but the character itself I never was that into. Kang was sort of the time travel alternate universe guy, so you got some really cool stories because Kang was in it, but the character himself, and it could just be the particular stories I read where he was written a little bland. But what do you like about Kang? What makes him your second favorite?
Well, a big part of it is the time travel aspect. I'm a sucker for time travel science fiction, so just the fact that is what he does is time travel and screws around with time. That very fact, I like it. You know, he doesn't actually have any superpowers. He's just from the future and takes future technology and comes in the past and takes over stuff because they can't compete with his technology. And he's a genius and everything, but ultimately he doesn't really have any powers. So I like that aspect of him. When you want a good comic book villain, and this is why Doctor Doom's my favorite, you want arrogance. The best to me comic book villains are the ones who are just so incredibly arrogant, just such jerks about it. And Kang, I mean, he calls himself Kang the Conqueror. I mean, you can't get much more arrogant than that, calling yourself the Conqueror, with all the time travel aspect of it. I love the whole millions of different versions and wondering who was who. What they did with him in the last episode is the MCU jumped right into the whole Kang variant aspect of it. I give them credit for having the guts for not doing a slow build to that. In the comics, because Kang's always traveling through time, there's a million different variants of him, because every time he goes to a different timeline, he's just creating different versions of himself. There's even actually a council of cross-time Kangs. You can kind of think of that scene with all the different Lokis that's sort of similar to that. And it's interesting that you said that you feel like a lot of the stories you read with him just didn't hit with you. I've loved the stories that I've read with him. And we can leave it for the end of the episode if you want, but I actually took the liberty to make a list of Kang essential reading, but if you want to, I can hold off on that till the end of the episode.
We'll definitely have to have the essential reading. So, Molly, you don't have the familiarity with Kang. From what you see the character, and this is going to be the big bad, what do you think of that as compared to what we've seen from major villains in the Marvel movies so far, especially Thanos, because Thanos was the main villain for the first 3 phases of Marvel movies?
I guess the first thing that comes to mind is psychology, and that's a little bit what Eric was touching on too, of arrogance, but also a justification for the actions that they do. That when you look at Thanos and the explanation that he had about, well, no one will know hunger, that he was looking at things from a resource perspective. On one hand, he's just this complete unstoppable force, but then he also has this perspective where you're like, you're not really doing this necessarily out of malevolence. Like, you see yourself as like a liberator in a sense. I am the one who has to hold the space to create the correction the universe just quote unquote doesn't have. So there's this fear and kind of connectivity with the reasoning where it's really difficult to just, I think, dismiss entirely. And I think when even this little brief moment that we've had with Kang actually gives this very, you believe him. I mean, Loki believes him that if he's not here, something far, far worse is going to come through. That's world ending. I think that, again, you have this really strange moral dilemma that you get saddled with as someone who's on a ride along with this narrative. And I think that he is equally psychologically powerful and has this illusion of all-knowing. And that's also quite frightening. So I think that there's this metaphysical aspect to him that's very compelling. And I think it's going to be very different. And he is also very charismatic as well in a very different way. He's almost more Loki than Loki in a sense. But I think that's going to be very interesting to see that contrast. And I also kind of like the fact, and I didn't know this from until now with Eric explaining it. I mean, they have a little bit, but he really kind of sent it home that he's not like, he's more of a Batman in a sense, that he isn't somebody who's an enhanced individual. You know, he's really smart, but he's kind of like a Rick Sanchez. I don't know if you guys are Rick and Morty fans at all, but yeah, he has more similar DNA to Rick Sanchez than, you know, he would say Captain America or something.
It's almost like, what was it, the kid in King Arthur's court, or the Yankee in King Arthur's court, the whole thing going back to the past, and it turns out it's real easy to conquer people with swords and bows and arrows. Basically, Kang coming to the 20th century is like a guy with a semi-machine gun fighting people with rocks. That'll be real interesting. And also, what he presented is like, the Kang we saw in Loki was a good guy, basically. And he's warning, is like, hey, the other me's are much worse. So it could be really interesting. And I can't say I'm real familiar with this actor, Jonathan Majors, but I know he's a well-respected actor. He's going to have a chance to play very, very different versions of the same character. So the next version of him we see could be a militant lunatic, or the next one we could see could be a fanciful lover. They could have a lot of fun seeing all the different versions.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. This is like the role of a lifetime for it. I'm not familiar with him either, but I agree. It seems like they're going to really lean into that each one is different, and that seems like the kind of thing that an actor would love to do. I mean, the version in this episode was most likely modeled after a Kang variant in the comics that's named Immortus. His MO usually is to kind of want to be the master of time, and some of the storylines with him have him indeed actually living at quote-unquote the end of time, and those were plot points in that episode, so that probably was supposed to be the Immortus version of Kang. He mentioned when he was saying, I've been called so many different things, and he mentioned the word ruler. I'm assuming that was a reference to there's another Kang who goes back to ancient Egypt and is Pharaoh Ramatut. Tying in other things that are going on, especially the 2 other shows that have been on Disney Plus so far, it certainly seems like Disney is setting up a young Avengers situation. And one of the Young Avengers is a character named Iron Lad, who models himself a bit after Iron Man, but that's actually a young version of Kang who doesn't want to become Kang. It really seems like they're really going to lean into this, and that could make for very interesting storytelling. You could have the version of Kang that's a villain in Ant-Man and the Wasp 3 could die in that movie, but then a different Kang shows up in Doctor Strange 2, who then dies, and then we get another one in Loki Season 2.
And they haven't announced what the next team-up movie's going to be, because what we've gotten used to is like, okay, you have the 3 or 4 movies, and then there's going to be an Avengers movie, and then 3 or 4 more movies, and then there's the next Avengers movie. We assume it'll be an Avengers movie, but they could go in a different direction where it could be Young Avengers or Thunderbolts. I mean, they might put a pause on the Avengers name for a while, but whatever that next big team-up movie, you could have a real neat moment where there's Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Thor, whoever, and it's like, oh, there's Kang, and they all say, and everyone says at the same time, it's like, but he died at the end of my thing. And realizing that, oh, the guy who gives everyone a run for their money is back, and now there's 6 of them. In some cases, I know there was like a council of like thousands of Kangs.
Yeah, the Council of Cross-Time Kangs.
So there could be some really fun, interesting stuff, and I'm looking forward to it. And they got the right actor, so this will be exciting. Aside from that, there's going to be a second season of Loki, and this is the first of these Disney shows where there's a confirmed second season of the show. With WandaVision, they're basically saying anything's possible, but they seem to be very much trying to tamp down anticipation for a second season. With Falcon and Winter Soldier, they talk about there being a new Captain America movie that would sort of continue it. Molly, what are your thoughts? Are you excited for a second season? Or I wonder, could it all of a sudden make it a little too self-contained? And we're so used to Marvel stuff branching, like interconnecting a little more. Here's the question. Do you think we're going to see Loki in a Marvel movie again? Or is he just going to have this little playground to stay in?
Oh, I think that he'll definitely get crossed over back again into a movie for sure.
I think they confirmed actually he's going to be in Doctor Strange 2.
That makes sense. Yeah, speaking of that, I watched Doctor Strange again recently. I don't know if you guys have seen it somewhat recently or not, but that was one of the things that I'm totally getting off. You totally asked me a question about like second. I'll get back to that. So second season. Yeah, no, I don't think it's a problem. I think they can definitely tie it in. I think that Eric had some thoughts about that I agreed with, that it felt like this was like a setup. And I think you also had mentioned something that this kind of felt like this is a setup for other properties. And I totally agree with that. I think my biggest gripe was that there weren't more episodes, that they had such a limited time to tell this bit of the story. And I really would have liked to have seen a full complement of 13 episodes. And I think there was a much more weird, wacky stuff that could have happened, because this was super ripe for surreal land. And that's what kind of brings me back to Doctor Strange, is that Doctor Strange had this amazing beginning where you have this hyper scientific guy, this is pre-car accident, and just gets his mind rocked by the reality of the mystic arts. And it gets kind of psychedelic, and it gets a little metaphysical, and things get a little weird, and you kind of like are riding along with it because all of this stuff seems kind of fantastic. So they kind of play with that as like a joke. You know, there's this really like cute comic relief line where Mordo gives him the piece of paper says Shambhala on it, and he's like, what is this, my mantra? He's like, no, it's, Wi-Fi password, we're not savages. So you have this like cool kind of like reflexiveness there, and I really wanted to see that more in Loki. I'm just a little disappointed that they just didn't go more surreal, and I was wondering if you guys had similar thoughts around that.
And it's something that could have been dealt with, if you're right, if they had 13 episodes. It's like, okay, so they're mindless, so they're sort of drones of the TVA. And the idea of taking this fantastical world and turning it into basically like an office adventure comedy, you could go deeper into this. Like, do they go to the movies? Beyond them just coming into this weird, insane office, what's the weird, insane world outside of it? you had some interesting characters. The one guy and he was a recurring player on The Good Place. It's a show I love very much. The guy who basically had a desk full of Infinity Stones. What's that guy's lunch break like?
Oh, yeah.
I think you could have a lot of fun as like, yeah, the mundane stuff is really weird for these people. And you can also do sort of like a neat bit of satire about, workday life, which is something that isn't touched upon too much in Marvel stuff. It's really difficult to do the mundane stuff of life in movies. They did a little bit with the last Spider-Man film, and they've been able to do it ever so slightly with the Disney Plus series. But I think you could lean into that because it must be insane living in the MCU, and then it's just in the regular MCU, much less in the TVA. Is just got to really double down on that insanity. And I think you could have a lot of fun with that, but you would need more time.
Yeah, I can see Molly's point that maybe it was a bit rushed. I think my only concern for that would be as someone who watched not all but some of the Marvel Netflix shows, is those shows had a lot of filler episodes, and those were shows that did do whatever it was, 10, 11, 12, 13 episodes, and clearly would have benefited from only being maybe 7 or 8 episodes long. So I almost wonder if what they're doing with Disney Plus is saying, well, we saw what happened with the Netflix shows. Most of them ran too long. We're not going to make that same mistake, so we're capping these at a hard limit of episodes.
Well, I would love to know the mentality, what it is. I'm sure it's a combination. But yeah, part of it's got to be, even the good Netflix shows could be a bit of a slog.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You don't want to slog, so let's tighten it up. But also, these were really big budget shows. They have some movie stars on these shows. Tom Hiddleston, they talked about him becoming the new James Bond. He was the lead in the Kong Skull Island movie. Elizabeth Olsen is a well-respected actress who can open a movie. Sebastian Stan has gotten award consideration for what he did in I, Tonya. They are movie stars. So I wonder if it's the thing is like, how these people must be expensive. And also, I bet there's limitations on their time. Like, you're not going to lock them in for, big TV stars like Mariska Hargitay from Law & Order Special Victims Unit. She does 20 plus episodes a season. That's her job. She doesn't really do anything aside from SVU because she is a TV star heavily associated with one character. Elizabeth Olsen has she got, I think, paid pretty big money to do a Facebook original show. Everybody in these shows, they have second jobs. So I'm sure there's like a limitation of how much time you can get from them. Same with Pedro Pascal from Mandalorian. By the way, Eric, you see Mandalorian got a bunch of Emmy nominations.
Yes, it did, and so did WandaVision.
Pedro Pascal, he does a bunch of other stuff. The same year that Mandalorian comes out, he has the one of the lead roles in the Wonder Woman film. It's very weird. When we were all growing up, you would never see Tom Cruise or Harrison Ford or Richard Gere, whoever is your A-list movie stars, Mel Gibson. You would never see them. It's like, okay, I'm going to take a break from doing these big budget movies to do a 6-episode TV show that just never happened.
Yeah, and not only that, but when you had a TV star like, let's say, Bruce Willis, who managed to make the transition to movies and became a huge movie star, never went back to TV either. He's like, I went into movies now I'm a movie actor. I'm not a TV actor anymore.
Going back was a failure.
Right.
Burt Reynolds, he was a movie star for many years, and then he did the show Evening Shade because it's like, oh, people don't go to see his movies anymore. Chevy Chase is the same thing when he did Community. It was because his movies were terrible and people stopped liking him as a leading man, so now he's just going to be the old guy on a weird show. Have you guys seen Black Widow yet?
Yes.
Yes.
Just real quick, how do we like Black Widow?
There's lots to like about it. I would probably put it on par with the first Thor in terms of how I kind of responded to it. I will definitely see it again. Florence Pugh is really a delight, complete delight. Big fan of Rachel Weisz, and so I really liked her inclusion in it. And I just love like Cold War stuff, Soviet stuff. That this is very personal, in my opinion, kind of stuff. But I wish it was like 10% better to just like hit that sweet spot. But I think it's a solid movie. I think they did a good job with it. I think there's a lot of good balance in it.
I thought it was okay. I put it sort of in the middle of the Marvel movies. Not one of my favorites, but it's not one of my least favorites either. You know, it was an enjoyable 2 hours. Good action stuff. Going back to my comic book geek roots, I wasn't entirely happy with what they did with Taskmaster, because that's not even remotely the Taskmaster from the comic books. But, I did not dislike it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. I think I probably would have liked it more if it had come out 5 years ago, or if it had been a movie that came out between Infinity War and Endgame. First off, because we already know that Natasha dies at the end of Endgame, or in the middle of Endgame. And also, somebody else pointed out to me, it almost doesn't fit into what we're seeing in the Marvel movies, because this seems to be the era of weird Marvel stuff. Doctor Strange, Thor Love and Thunder, where you're going to have a female Thor, Spider-Man movie where all the rumors about there being 3 Spider-Man and all the multiverse stuff, and Shang-Chi, which has mystical martial arts stuff. So it's weird. This is a movie that would fit in real well right after Captain America Winter Soldier. It feels almost out of sync with the other movies that are going on right now. Now, on one hand, who cares as long as it's a good movie? But the movie already feels a little like coming out a little too late, because this is a character who's already dead. It adds to that sort of disconnect where it feels belongs in a different phase of Marvel. But I enjoyed it too. I mean, and I completely agree. I thought Florence Pugh was great, and she got a chance to do a little bit of commentary on the silliness of these movies. Just her talking about, why do you land like that? What are you guys really excited about? Eric, I know you're excited about more Kang, but where are you excited to see Kang? And same for you, Molly. Like, in specific to Marvel stuff, what are you excited about? Because there's a lot of stuff that's going to be coming out in the next couple of years.
The show I am by far the most excited about is She-Hulk. She was my favorite female superhero back when I read comics, and they have implied that she's going to be breaking the fourth wall on the show, which is what the character did in the comic. So I love that they're going to do that. They have also announced the villains for the show, Titania, who is her main rival in the comics, so it's great that they're going to have that. There's a rumor that they might have the Wrecking Crew in it, which are 4 bad guys that team up together, and they are my favorite bad guy team from the comics, so there is a lot about that show I'm looking forward to. For the movies, I mean, Spider-Man's my guy. Any Spider-Man coming out in the MCU, I like the first 2, so definitely looking forward to Spider-Man.
I like the character Titania so much because she was introduced in the Secret War miniseries. She was great because her whole thing was like she held her own with She-Hulk. And then it's been a great thing where they've keep going back to that, where Titania keeps losing because she's a bad guy. She loses all the time. I remember there was one issue of the She-Hulk series that was so funny. She-Hulk by day is a lawyer, and Titania was outside the courthouse, like kept calling She-Hulk out for a fight while She-Hulk's trying to plead this case. And she would just said, "Your Honor, can I have a 10-minute recess?" And she would go outside, punch Titania on top of the head until she like got stuck in the ground. She hit her so hard. Then she would go back in to finish her case. Humor. And then you have Jamil, whose name I'm completely butchering. She's Titania. She is wonderful. She played Tahani in The Good Place, going back to The Good Place. She's a wonderful actress. And were either of you guys Good Place fans?
Yes.
Oh, I'd never seen an episode.
Great show. But basically, Tahani, her character, was this incredibly gorgeous, educated, talented, beautiful woman. The main character, Eleanor, played by Kristen... What's the name of the actress? I like her so much, and I'm completely blanking.
So like end with an S.
I want to say Stewart, but that's not right. Kristen Stewart isn't right.
That's what I wanted to say too, but that's not right.
Kristen Bell. Kristen Bell.
Kristen Bell, yes.
Kristen Bell plays Eleanor, who's jealous. So just imagine how great looking and tall and statuesque and beautiful do you have to be to make Kristen Bell look like the frog in this situation. But I think you could have an interesting dynamic where Tatiana Maslany, who's an amazing actress, as She-Hulk, and dealing with, like, she's going to play this powerful, super strong woman, and she's going to be dealing with an actress who towers a foot over her. I think that could be really interesting stuff. And Tim Roth is going to be back.
Oh, cool.
As Abomination. Of course, there was a lot of talk where, what was it? You could ever so briefly see Abomination in the
Shang-Chi trailer.
Yeah, Shang-Chi trailer. And it's like, oh, that's nice. Every now and then, Incredible Hulk gets a little bit of love. If you guys feel that it deserves the love, but, there were some good actors in that movie. Molly, what about you? What are you excited for inside of Marvel? Like, is there like a movie or something that you're like, I can't wait for that?
Oh, Love and Thunder. Absolutely. I love what Taika has done. He's just, I really like what they did what we do in the shadows. I like his like New Zealand kind of dry sense of humor. I love how, I mean, I don't know how bright this is going to be, but I love the styling for Ragnarok. I think it was just lighthearted. You could just tell people were enjoying themselves. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does with another installment and how they take the storyline with like a Lady Thor. I'm also really curious about what's going to happen with Doctor Strange 2. I think it's Multiverse of Madness, if I'm correct on that. I heard that there might be kind of a Wanda Maximoff crossover in this too. Maybe that doesn't pan out, but I heard some rumors that she was going to maybe make an appearance. So I think it's going to be kind of interesting. I've really grown to dig Doctor Strange a whole lot. Even the last Avengers movies. And, I'm going to really miss that, like, asshole versus asshole Tony Stark versus Doctor Strange thing they had going, which was really masterful. But, yeah, I'm really curious to see, where they take things. It's always interesting from, like, a writing perspective. After you develop an origin story, can you maintain the momentum? Where do you take things? I think Captain America was one of those, rare series where I loved everything that came after the first one.
I agree. And I just rewatched most of First Avengers, and it's like, this is a fine movie. The thing I always found most interesting about Captain America was he's a man out of time. He wasn't in the first movie up until the very end, and I found the most interesting part, a lot of ways, the end of that movie where he comes to modern-day New York. It's like, okay. This was sort of the movie I was waiting for, or the movie I'm excited to see. I'm also looking forward to the second Doctor Strange. I'm a Sam Raimi fan. It'll be neat to see Sam Raimi doing a comic book movie again.
Yes.
Did you guys see they apparently, after the last episode of WandaVision came out, they sort of tweaked it where if you look real hard, you can see Doctor Strange's astral projection floating towards Wanda's cabin at the end of the last episode?
What?
I don't remember that.
I'm going to have to find it. There are articles about it where apparently months after the last episode came out, if you go back and watch it now, they tweaked the last episode. And it's pretty hard to see, but you just see something moving through the trees going towards the cabin.
Huh.
This isn't like that fan trailer that you mentioned earlier when we were chatting, is it, Brad?
Entertainment Weekly posted this. If they got fooled, that's okay. I'm still pretty mad at myself about that. WandaVision, another Google.
While you do that, I want to. We never even discussed Sylvie.
Oh yeah,
everything that went on with having a female Loki that Loki falls in love with, and all of the stuff I read online. There was this big debate of they kiss after building up to it through the course of the whole show, which, by the way, my kids got completely grossed out by. I was actually surprised Disney allowed the MCU to go there, to be honest with you. I didn't think they would do it because of that. But everything online is this debate of, are the two of them kissing? Is it incest or is it narcissism? To me, it's pure narcissism. Of course, someone like Loki, the only person that he's truly capable of falling in love with is just another version of himself. It makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, it does to me too.
there's a lot of things happening there. First off, you have really good, charming, good-looking actors. It's like you sort of root for them to get together, even though you know it is a bit of a weird stuff. Sort of similar to at the end of Game of Thrones. I was just talking about Game of Thrones, where you were waiting for Dany and Kit Harington's character to hook up, even though it's like, she's his aunt, right? Should we still be rooting for him to get together when she's his aunt? It's also Norse mythology. There's all sorts of crazy in there.
Things get freaky.
I mean, they got nothing on the Greek gods.
I remember in high school, the teacher reading aloud a story about how the Minotaur was born. There was a beautiful bull. The queen, because of shenanigans from the gods, because the gods were made it so she fell instantly in love, found the local inventor to make her a cow costume that had springs on it, so it would bounce seductively when it would go, when she would be in the cow costume. And I remember the story being read, and this is how scarring it is. I remember this, and it's been a long time since I was in high school, folks. And the teacher, who was this very sweet, matronly looking woman, is like, and the bull saw the cow bouncing in the moonlight. And the next morning, the queen went to the inventor and patted his shoulder and said, thank you very much. And then 9 months later, the Minotaur was born. It's like, wait a minute, she that bull? And the teacher's reading to me in high school about her the bull? And basically high-fiving the inventor who made the bull possible?
Norse mythology, Loki turns into a cow and gets impregnated and gives birth to a horse or something. There's all kinds of wackiness in the Norse mythology too.
And again, this was stuff that was taught in school. It's another thing I remember. There was I want to say middle school assembly where they had a play on one of the stories of Zeus. They had a puckish character who would talk to the audience. He's like, and it's my job to distract your husband. And then she does some wackiness and distracts the husband. And then you see this 12-year-old, 13-year-old kid going into the house where the woman was. And she's like, now I just wait for Zeus to come back out. It's like, wait a minute.
Ooh.
And again, it was weird enough where I'm like, well, that was 30 plus years ago. And I still think, hey, wait a minute. Zeus, disguised as this woman's husband, banged this woman. Is there's laws against that.
Well, not when you're Zeus.
Yeah, we gotta Me Too Zeus. I mean, really, he's just one cocktail away from being Cosby.
Oof.
Going on the Mount Olympus and eat the Jello.
Oh no! Oh no! Do not take the Zeus pudding.
Yeah. By the way, has anybody watched anything Cosby related since the trial started?
It's so funny you asked that because I have a couple of his CDs. I was a very big fan of his stand-up comedy, and I have not listened to them since the news broke several years ago. And I've often wondered, am I even allowed to listen to these anymore? And in fact, I was talking to someone a couple of months ago where something came up that reminded me of a joke he once told. And I prefaced it by telling the person, I know we're not supposed to laugh at this guy anymore, but he told this joke once that was really funny and is appropriate for this situation, and told the joke. But I felt I had to preface it, though.
That's an interesting, dilemma, and I feel like that's a very poignant dilemma these days, because I was talking to my husband about Michael Jackson. When you have somebody who, not unlike Cosby, who's been shown true colors publicly, to what degree is it okay to enjoy the art still?
It's so hard. For some reason, it seems easier when they're dead or they're retired or they're not producing anymore. Jerry Lee Lewis, the killer, the musician, hideous human being, but it feels detached because he passed away and he's no longer committing problems. So supporting him isn't going to help put money in his pocket to continue doing crappy stuff. And I've talked about this on the show before. I'm a big fan of the music of Ryan Adams, and Ryan Adams was sort of revealed to not be the greatest person. Got some Me Too repercussions. And he put out an album 2-3 months ago. I want to listen to the music because he makes great music, but geez, he's a bad guy, and I don't want to giving the approval for him continuing to make music is uncomfortable? I don't know. I don't have a great answer for this. I know Cosby's talking about when to go on tour. I don't think I'm going to go to that show.
Awkward.
Yeah. But Mal, have you watched anything that Cosby did? Every now and then you would see reruns of I think Cosby's show. I think that stopped, but for a while the trial was going on, you could still find reruns of that on deep cable.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything with him in it for a number of years. Yeah, and I don't even look at pudding the same way, honestly, or Jell-O. There's like a scumbag kind of rapey vibe to Jell-O now for me because of him, because of the association. So it's tough. It's tough when somebody really falls in that way.
I bet that if instead of pudding, if Bill Cosby had been someone who hawked pineapple pizza, Molly, you would not have given it up.
Oh man, why you gotta put it in those kind of terms?
Yeah, your ethical stand would fall apart if that's what he was hawking.
Man, I would, I would feel really sad about it though, but I think I would give it up. If pineapple pizza had been Cosby-ified, yeah, I probably would. But I would be really sad about it. I'd be really, really broken up about it.
With Cosby, when you find out they're scumbags and how they're scumbags, you go back to their previous work through those eyes. It's like, oh, sometimes they show who they are a little bit. With Cosby, they've replayed his Spanish Fly routine, where he talked about him and his buddies trying to find Spanish Fly because they heard if you gave a drink to Spanish Fly, the women would just pass out, and how that was the goal. And then there was also an episode of the Cosby Show. They were having a barbecue, and whatever he put on the food made his daughters and their husbands made the daughters like sort of zonked out and kind of horny. And he's like, "Yep, that happens. I always have success with the barbecue." It's like, wow, that doesn't look nearly as good in current eyes. And what was it? Dan Schneider, who was the producer of a lot of the Nickelodeon shows.
Oh, he's done some not so good things.
From the stories and the stuff I've read up and seen they've done YouTube commentaries on it. Really liked teenage girls to walk around barefoot. And then they start showing clips from the shows he did. Is like, there's our Carly. And in this episode, Carly, she's going to be barefoot and she's just pouring ketchup over her feet. It's like, why? How did we not see this? Turns out just terrible people all around. And then we're going to realize stuff that we like later. It's like, oh, yeah, it was the clues were right there.
Oof.
All right, guys. So on that happy note, so we're all excited for the second season of Loki.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, Eric, that's a big question. Would you be and will you remain excited if they say, "Oh, Kang isn't going to be in the second season"?
Yeah, I would, because I liked the show. I don't see them doing that because the Stinger scene was of a statue of Kang. Loki's obviously in this alternate timeline now, so I don't think that's going to happen. But even if for whatever reason they do some kind of retconning and then pull that out, yeah, I think it'll. As of now, I watch everything the MCU does, so I'm certainly watching everything.
And when that second season comes out, we're going to reconvene afterwards and do this again.
All right.
Got to take your time to plug our pluggables. Eric, you've been sort of quiet on the podcasting landscape. Anything upcoming or anything in mind or anything else that you want to share with the audience?
Well, I've been quiet in the sense that, yeah, ever since Molly and I and you completed Escape from New York Minute, I have not done a third show. I have a third show I want to do, but I haven't been able to force myself to be motivated to do it yet, so I'm not going to make any kind of announcement on what it would be. I guess so. Instead of that, I will inform all your lovely listeners of the Kang Essential Reading List that I came up with. Avengers 8 is his first appearance. Avengers 23 to 24 is when Ravonna first appears. Some good storylines. Avengers 69 to 71, 141 to 143, 267 to 269. There's a Marvel team-ups story from issues 9 through 11 that has him. If you want to see the Council of Cross-Time Kangs in action that Brad and I both mentioned, they're a big part of the plot in the Avengers story that runs from issues 291 to 297. There is an arc called the Kang Dynasty or Kang War, which is a long, epic storyline that runs from an Avengers Volume 3, issue 41 to 55. It was more than a year long of Kang taking over the entire planet and the Avengers having to fight back about it. Great story. To me, the quintessential Kang story is there's a limited series called Avengers Forever, a 12-issue limited series that also involves Immortus. It involves the Timekeepers, and it's just a great ride through Avengers history that Kang is a big part of. And I will say that I suggest you not read a storyline called The Crossing that ran through a bunch of Avengers issues, because it genuinely sucks, and it is universally reviled. Read all the Kang stuff I said, and don't read that Kang story.
Yeah, recommend everyone do that. And I'm going to toss one in, and this is sort of a weird one. Incredible Hulk 286. It was published in August 1983, written by Bill Mantlo, creator of Rocket Raccoon, drawn by Sal Buscema, sort of an underrated artist who I liked very much. It involved the Hulk. There's a time storm, and he gets sent to the future. And it's a world that Kang had taken over, but Kang at that point was dead, because that's what happens. All the denizens of that world were still fighting to become, basically for Kang's approval. And you just saw a statue of Kang encouraging everyone to continue to fight and battle. And it was really neat because it was sort of a fun single issue, but I really enjoyed it because it showed just the influence and the impact Kang and supervillains in general can have on the world even after they're no longer around. And it was sort of a fun issue. Bill Mantlo, really good writer. Real life, really tragic story where he was a comic book writer, very successful, created some cool characters. Then he left comics to become a lawyer, and then ended up getting, while riding his bicycle, he was involved in a hit and run accident, and he suffered pretty profound brain damage, and he basically is receiving full-time care and was sort of in a pretty desperate situation, but then got some support after Guardians of the Galaxy came out because Rocket Raccoon, this character he created, was in it. Pretty interesting from that aspect, but highly recommend Incredible Hulk 286, and the people who have that Marvel app, go and read it. Molly, plug your pluggables.
There's an episode that I did with Rocky Horror Picture Minute that should be coming out either soon or just came out recently. I think it's yet to come out. But those ladies are a complete riot, and I know Eric also guested on there. So
yeah, they are a blast.
Yeah, it was just a really good, filthy time. And it was just cool to podcast with a couple of ladies and a couple of just like really smart, funny ladies. And so yeah, it was kind of wacky times there. On the totally other end of the spectrum, somehow I got roped into producing a podcast, which is, dun, 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 because I can't get enough of editing. And it's actually a Buddhist podcast, and it's called Wednesday Wake Up. So if anybody is interested in like the Western Theravada take on Buddhism and neuroscience and the human potential movement, you can check it out. And it's WednesdayWakeUp.com. And the other thing I'm going to plug, which is just kind of awesome, is I was recently in Vegas and we went to the Mob Museum, and I love like John Dillinger, like Prohibition era history for the most part. And so there's it's a nonprofit museum and it's kind of off of Fremont in case anyone's kind of local or going through there. But anyway, the real gem of it is that there is a working still in the basement, a distillery that makes moonshine.
Oh,
I highly recommend going on the moonshine tour because they will give you moonshine and then go through how like rum running worked back in the 1920s, how the whole like moonshine process goes down. And they also, this is another fun fact, which was really cool. They learned that during the height of COVID, because people were running out of hand sanitizer, they made moonshine hand sanitizer and gave it to like clinics and hospitals in the area, which I thought was very cool. Yeah, that's my pluggables. Moonshine and Buddhism.
If that isn't the name of a podcast, I don't know what is. So. All right, guys. Well, this has been amazing. As always, we're going to do this again. Thank you so much. That wraps episode 241. Big thanks to Erica and Molly. They are fantastic, and I will have them back soon. What I should do is dramatic readings of the text messages we share. They are really weird, inappropriate, and damn funny. Next time on the Cosmic Geppetto podcast, Honey Badger and her amazing friends are back to talk Black Widow. Till then, in the words of Jarv Harden,
see you in the funny pages.
Subscribe to the Cosmic Geppetto podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever quality podcasts can be found. Rate and review us while there. Follow us on Twitter @CosmicGPod, and we will follow you back. Unless you're a jerk. We don't follow jerks. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cosmic Geppetto. We love hearing your ideas for upcoming episodes. Email us at cosmicgeppetto@comcast.net.
Going on the Mount Olympus and eat the jello.